Thanks, guys. I think we're gonna get started. Um, Hey, everyone in the room and watching this. I want to understand this is one of the virtual sessions, so watching in the remote conference. I'm Stephanie Wein. I'm the Clean Water and Conservation Advocate at PennEnvironment, so a grassroots advocacy policy organization that works at the state, local, and federal level in Pennsylvania. And then in a minute or two, I'm going to set up a little bit about our involvement in this work in the film, and then I'm going to toss it over to the director, Ben, who will share a little bit about what brought him to want to tell these stories. And so thanks for joining us for the post-lunch movie night with the Choose Clean Water Coalition. So first, I want to sort of place this in context. So every year, I feel like the Pennsylvania groups come to the Choose Clean Water Coalition to sort of be chastised by the other groups in the watershed for being the problem children of the Chesapeake, whether it's our agricultural runoff or our history of fossil fuel extraction and the present fossil fuel extraction. We're sort of the problem children of the Chesapeake, and we are one of the more polluted regions, and so we bring you a story from one of Pennsylvania's most polluted regions. And for folks who don't know their Pennsylvania geography super well, we're going to go to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania, which is just over the dividing line from the Chesapeake watershed. So right at the beginning of the Ohio. But the communities and the pollution that we're looking at in A River Reborn are something that they're in the headwaters of a lot of the Chesapeake Bay states, the headwaters of the Susquehanna River in Virginia and in Maryland, the long legacy of coal pollution. And so the restoration in this documentary started with a lawsuit. So PennEnvironment in 2007, so not me, but when I was literally in college, but PennEnvironment 15 years ago took on Genon, a coal facility, and took it to court. This coal-fired power plant was literally taking the scrubbers that allow it to comply with the Clean Air Act and dumping them into the Conemaugh River. And so we sued them under the Clean Water Act. And 5 years later, the largest penalty against a Clean Water Act violator in Pennsylvania was awarded. And usually a part of that penalty goes to the government, back to the people. And that a small part did in this case, but the majority of that settlement, $3.5 million, we were able to turn over to environmental restoration in the impacted community through Foundation for Pennsylvania Watersheds. And A River Reborn captures what that restoration looked like. And so too often, I think we as advocates focus our time on how we have failed the natural environment. And we have this legacy in a lot of the watershed of extraction and damaged landscapes that have been left behind. And we need to see success in order to envision what's possible. And I think it's really good for us as advocates to take a river that was given up for dead in a region where the ideas of conservation and green are red flag words. A lot of people who do not think of themselves as environmentalists in an area where organizing on these issues is incredibly difficult, and use that as an opportunity to think how there are no lost cause rivers, there are no lost cause communities. And that's what I hope folks take from this film. I want to turn it over to Ben Kalina, an award-winning director, to introduce himself and what motivated him to create this piece. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me virtually. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but Stephanie did a great job of explaining really what drew me to this story, which is that having made a number of different films about environmentally related themes, from sea level rise to ocean acidification and so forth, and working with different organizations, I find myself often looking for hopeful stories, and I'm also really interested in finding places where, or stories or themes that have the potential to bring people together to kind of move beyond to those traditional divisions. And as Stephanie was mentioning, in terms of red flag words like conservation or environmentalism. And so, I think you'll see in the approach that I tried to take with this film was to acknowledge the legacy of coal mining in all of its ways, both in the sense of the toxic legacy, but also not diminishing the value that it played, that the industry played for its role both in the industrialization of this country, but also lifting people both out of poverty and also giving them steady work that they felt very, that became a part of the legacy of the region and the culture. So, to me, it's an opportunity to kind of look at places where we have shared values, which are in, healthy environment and a healthy community and healthy economy, and try to build from that a new vision for, the future that brings all those together. And so we can talk more about that afterwards. And I think one of the things that is interesting to me about this film and this kind of storytelling is really the potential that it has to sort of strategically help forward initiatives that all of you, I think, work on every day and care about by storytelling in ways that bring people together and sort of show a path towards these, these positive outcomes and potential vision for the future that people can wrap their arms around, regardless of their political, tribal mentality or the tribe that they think they belong to. So I guess, we can talk more about that afterwards, and I'll be here. I hope you enjoy the show.
Thanks.
Stoney Creek on the right. This is the Ben's Creek coming in. It dumps in right here. Up here we're going to cut down in, across a covered bridge from the 1800s and see if we can catch a trout in a stream that's come back from the acid days. Welcome to my backyard. When I was a little child, I could fish the little creeks when I was 5 or 6. But by the time I was 10, all the fish were gone. The pollution had gotten so bad. You could paint your car with the creek when I was a child, sitting down on the porch listening to my grandfather's stories. And the orange in the sky and the orange dust on everything, and there was no fish, and it smelled. From something that I thought would never, ever, ever support life again and was a shame and a waste, it's now got fish in it. I can take my grandkids swimming in it. I can find a crawdad in it. I never thought I'd be able to see this river fishable again.
Pennsylvania is a unique place in terms of fresh water, second only to Alaska in miles of streams and rivers.
Here in Pennsylvania, we're really blessed. We have great waterways, rivers and streams, lakes and wetlands that crisscross the state, but a huge percentage of them are considered unsafe for fishing and swimming. Most of the pollution comes from these old abandoned coal mines.
Pennsylvania is home to an invisible web of underground mines, the legacy of a once mighty industry. Since the early 1800s, the coal mines of Pennsylvania have provided 1 out of every 4 tons of coal produced in the United States, energy that powered the Industrial Revolution and the war efforts of World War I and II. The coal industry peaked in Pennsylvania in 1918 at 276 million tons, and then began a century-long decline.
Coal mining was regulated first in 1977, and we're now dealing with the legacy of sites that were degraded prior to 1977. 240,000 acres of dead, toxic land and 5,600 miles of dead waterways.
All of our parents worked either in a steel mill or in a coal mine. They see those orange rivers, and that means there was a mine down there, and that mine provided jobs, and that mine provided coal, and it sustained families. That was the trade-off. Yeah, you had some environmental trade-offs for the sake of getting jobs, and they were okay with that. We played in them. We got yelled at when we'd come home, dyed orange from what we called the Sulphur Creek.
There's a little trail over here we can walk down. Okay. It's right around here to the right, so we'll have to kind of walk around and look. We should be able to see it pretty well. This is the headwaters of the Little Conemaugh River. It's the South Fork branch. Not too far from here, above the whole way to the reservoir, which is a couple miles, it's a native brook trout fishery. This was a giant mine complex all through the center of Beaverdale, and there were numerous mine openings. That's the old mine opening that went back under the hillside. This is a very large discharge that's really impacting the stream from here down. Very low pH, it's acidic, and that orange color is the iron. When you have this volume of water coming into the river, once this stuff hits it, nothing else, there's nothing really living in it.
Death and rebirth are familiar themes along the banks of the Little Conemaugh River. In 1889, swollen by rain, Lake Conemaugh burst through an earthen dam. A 40-foot-high wall of water careened downriver, destroying everything in its path and leveling the city of Johnstown, killing 2,200 people. But despite the apocalyptic force of the Great Johnstown Flood, the coal mines survived, and the city rebuilt.
Cambria County was really at the heart of production of coal for the Industrial Revolution and had a lot of scars related to that.
As the coal industry shrank, mine shafts were abandoned, and rainwater began to fill the underground caverns, mixing with exposed metals until the mines overflowed with a toxic slurry of iron, manganese, and aluminum. Poisoned by these metals and unable to support life, rivers like the Little Conemaugh were left for dead. But in 2008, the Foundation for Pennsylvania Watersheds proposed a resurrection for the river. They targeted the 7 largest sources of pollution flowing into the Little Conemaugh, the Super 7.
The Super 7 report was done locally in Cambria County in 2008, describing 7 deadly discharges along a 13-mile stretch of river.
Pollution from old mines is impossible to stop in one fell swoop. When you treat the contaminated water, basically at most of these sites, you have to treat it in perpetuity. You have to set up a treatment plant along the site with the pollution, clean it, and keep doing it forever forward.
90% of the toxic metals flowing into the Little Conemaugh come from the Super 7. Runoff from mines can be filtered in artificial ponds, but the scale of pollution from these sites requires a different approach. The St. Michael plant was built to treat the largest of these 7 sites, the source of 30% of the pollution entering the Little Conemaugh, where iron levels are 100 times higher than in a healthy river.
The work at St. Michael is really giving people examples of what restoration looks like and giving them hope for tomorrow.
This is what this whole entire valley complex looked like. The shaft would have been located over here. This is what would go down 650 feet. The mine closed. It closed in the 50s. So the mine filled up, completely inundated with water, and was actually able to rise 650 feet up this shaft location and then discharge into what they call Topper Run here, which is a tributary to the Little Conemaugh River. In order to prevent that discharge from coming out, we actually put pumps down into the old shaft there, and this is where we draw the water from. This mine, the main problem with it, suppressed pH, iron. And the iron concentrations we're talking about are 169 parts per million, milligrams per liter. To give you some context, an in-stream criteria has like 1.5. That's what they would consider to be a normal iron content of a stream in Pennsylvania. If you put 169 parts per million water into the stream and it increases just a little bit of the alkalinity, it just will go orange everywhere. And that orange color is just the iron being precipitated out. That iron precipitate just clings to the bottom, and that actually is what kills all of the bugs, kills the life in the stream. This system in total takes that 169 parts per million and takes it down to 1.5 to 3. It's almost a 99% reduction in iron loading. That is 2.2 million pounds of iron every year the St. Michael system pulls out of the stream and prevents it from going into the Little Conemaugh.
Treatment plants like St. Michael are effective, but they cost millions of dollars to build and operate, money the Foundation for Pennsylvania Watersheds didn't have. But a court case brought against a different polluter was about to create an opportunity.
Local environmental groups get a record settlement against a company accused of more than 8,000 violations of the Clean Water Act.
It's a big day for Pennsylvanians, and especially Pennsylvanians who care about our environment.
Fine that goes with it allows the Foundation for Pennsylvania Watersheds to address site-specific problems throughout the watershed to approach a more holistic restoration.
These acid mine cleanup projects are incredibly expensive, and so that penalty money became really the seed money for much of the work being done today to try and clean up the Super 7.
The cleanup of a waterway starts at the very bottom. It starts with the bugs that make their life cycle in the bottom of a stream. If we don't have a healthy population of macroinvertebrates, we don't have a fish population.
Watersheds are nature's drains, funneling drops of water as they become creeks, streams, and eventually rivers, like the Little Conemaugh. Through its journey, this water absorbs traces of everything it touches: soil, sediment, and toxic metals.
This is just a little unnamed tributary to the South Fork branch of the Little Conemaugh. It actually has a pretty big watershed, over 100 acres drained down into this little stream here. It's a great place to bring the kids because it's not affected by mining. If you find these stoneflies and mayflies and caddisflies, you'll know that that's a nice, good quality stream. Very important because larger animals that live in the stream, like fish and salamanders and crayfish, they all eat these guys. So without these in the stream, you're not gonna have a lot of fish and other creatures living in that stream. Do you guys ever go fishing for trout in the stream? You wanna have a nice, cold stream with lots of macroinvertebrates if you're gonna have trout living in there. I grew up just over the hill in Salix, so I grew up in the Little Conemaugh watershed. I interned for the county, doing some just basic stream sampling and mapping abandoned mine discharges in the Little Conemaugh watershed. I really got to know the entire watershed. I walked pretty much the entire thing, walked all the small tributaries, and really got to just a realization of how big the problem was with abandoned mine drainage. We want to find an area like this where there's a lot of bubbles coming up. There's a lot of oxygen in the water here flowing over the rocks. And what we're doing is we're knocking all those little guys that live on the rocks loose so that they flow down into our net in the water. Did you get anything? My goal is to teach the next generation, like, hey, this is what's living in a healthy stream.
I mean, most places you go, like you see little streams and that, you see fish in them. You come here, what do you see? Orange. Some orange in there. There's something the fish ain't never gonna live in. And if it wasn't orange, I'd be down there every day fishing.
In the town of Ehrenfeld lies another of the Super 7, where a mountain of coal waste loomed above the village for decades. A smoldering reminder of the past.
A spoil pile with millions of tons of spoil falling down next to houses. You could see it from the highway, and it was impacting the economic value of the houses in this town. So the mayor was very much behind it.
You could see it. You could see this coming out of the ground and that, and you could smell it. Then it caved in. And then once it caved in, I think that's when this all started about getting rid of that pile.
But how do you move 14 million tons of toxic coal waste? The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, or DEP, didn't have the tools or expertise. So they enlisted a company with decades of experience digging up large piles of rock. Rosebud Mining.
We have how much more to go?
155 feet.
155. That's going to be the toughest, 155 feet.
The Ehrenfeld pile is a complex scenario of surface acidic mine drainage, and then without the project, it's spilling out into river, contaminated. You have to imagine a bulge or refuse was here always down, all the way down to the river. They've advanced this far to remove over 2.8 million tons of the refuse material.
The refuse began all the way at the top of the mountain here and went down to the river. So where we're standing right now, 2 years ago, this would be the middle of the refuse pile.
When the project is complete, the DEP will have moved the refuse pile to a nearby mountainside, mixing the contaminated soil with limestone to neutralize it, then burying it under layers of earth to keep the metals from escaping.
Well, I'm hoping maybe someday we can have boating down there and have a little store that we could sell stuff in that, you know, like bait and tackle or whatever, and that's something to bring a little bit of money in this town. Instead of opening your door and look out and see that big pile, it's gonna be green. It's gonna really be nice, I think.
The cleanup at Ehrenfeld restored 40% of the town's developable land and put 40 unemployed miners back to work.
It's a marvelous example of how pollution can be abated statewide. This was a river that was designated unfixable. It's a great success, and I think we're going to get to the end of the 7 deadly discharges and clean up a waterway. With restoration of our waterways, Pennsylvania has an opportunity to have a much better economy in the future.
We're looking at what direction can we take the region as the people that are coming up and living in here and becoming the adults in the region now. We don't want to forget our heritage, but we can't dwell on that at the same time. We have to look forward, and the obvious answer is recreation.
Like the Little Conemaugh, the nearby Stoney Creek had been left for dead. But a grassroots coalition saw its potential and set out to restore the river with a vision of a different future.
8 years ago, I bought my first whitewater kayak off of eBay, knowing absolutely nothing about the sport. And I showed up over here and some guy was like, hey, you should be wearing a helmet. They don't call this the Stoney Creek for nothing. And from there, they started fostering my skills. The Ben's Creek Canoe Club kind of took me under their wing.
Right there, Josh. The Ben's Creek Canoe Club has been here paddling all the time. And I pulled into the parking lot. They were standing there with the raft. And they're like, you know, what are you doing? They're like, you want to come with? And I'm like, yes, I do want to come with. So it was the first time down at a proper level with people who knew their way around. And I had so much fun. I'm like, I'm all in here. Nice. All right. So, nice, easy canoe strokes just for the first time to get a good feel. Right here at the ball field. All right. All right.
People don't realize what a key part recreation is for economic development. You need to create that healthy environment for all of us, both residents and visitors. And sometimes we need to think a little bit outside the box as to how we're going to create that positive end result.
So this is our new location here in Johnstown, PA. We've got a lot going on down here. As our business has grown, we've needed more space, more room to expand. They're redoing this whole building as a redevelopment project in downtown, but right now we're the first ones in here while they do all the construction. I was in Texas. I was in navigator training for the Air Force, and I was down there on the weekends, and we're like, all right, we'll get out in the river. People seem to go down to the Conemaugh River, and we went over there, and there was like, 2,000 people on this river, floating down. And when I saw the river tubing, that was something that can be brought to the masses. I wanted to make sure that we had a low-cost summer recreation option, for Johnstown in the area that people could afford and bring their families to. I called back to my wife, Jill, and I said, we need to open a river outfitter here, and do river tubing. We basically came out and said, is the river clean? Is it cleaned up enough to get out there and put people on it? But it turns out the efforts are working. In 2012, we won River of the Year in Pennsylvania because of the cleanup and remediation efforts. We rolled the dice and said, what if we go downtown, which is ultimately the goal of this area, is to have recreation emanating from the center of the city. So we're hoping to set the example. It's pretty unique of an experience to drive into a city, people walking around with coolers, and shorts, bikinis, bathing suits, and people love it. It blows their minds that this is happening in Johnstown. These ideas, they're not out of reach. If someone came up to you and say, I want to put 2 train tracks on that hill and put cars going up and down them, most people look at you and be like, you're crazy. But in Johnstown, we're like, oh no, it's a great idea. We have one, it's the incline plane. It makes total sense. Let's think really large and big, and why not? Why can't we do it?
Johnstown certainly feels like it has the potential to tap into this rebirth and growth in tourism and recreation. It's an area that's really a hidden gem in Pennsylvania. Beautiful countryside, mountains, hidden streams, big rivers. It's got a bit of everything for people who love the outdoors.
This is the annual Stoney Creek Rendezvous. It's a whitewater event that takes place right here on the Stoney Creek River in Greenhouse Park. Greenhouse Park is actually Pennsylvania's first man-made whitewater park, so all of these waves are completely fabricated. We bring in about 1,000 people every year to recreate on our rivers. There's a very, if you build it, they will come mentality amongst people like myself and Chad. They built this whitewater park. People come here every night. Even if they're not whitewater kayakers, people come here to swim just because it's easy access to the river. We see people from 5 states come on a normal whitewater release weekend outside of the Rendezvous. One of my other projects, I built a series of downhill mountain bike trails on the incline plane hillside. I see people from Pittsburgh driving to Johnstown to ride mountain bikes. People are going to come if we just start fostering this sort of activity. These aren't cheap hobbies. Every single one of those whitewater kayaks is at least $700. And it's not just kayaking. If you look at mountain biking or hiking or any of those activities, the people that are doing these kind of activities have disposable income. When they come into town, your restaurants see that. People are spending money, they're getting dinner afterwards, they're having a beer. Maybe they're staying in your hotels, they're buying gas. We just are trying to get our chunk of that into our community and funnel that into our local businesses.
We have a lot going on here as far as economic development, kayaking, canoeing, tubing, the whitewater rafting. It's basically changed our downtown as well, where in the past, a lot of times between like 8 and 4:30 is where you had the business community working in your downtown. And now we see on the weekends where that population is being replaced with bathing suits and swimming trunks, walking our streets and investing in our downtowns, enjoying our restaurants, and spending time with their families in our community. We are able to create economic stability through our natural resources.
The cleaner the river is, the more vibrant the local economy is, and the higher quality of life. People are flocking to places that have clean water and clean rivers running through those communities. And so making sure that they're clean and safe for fishing and swimming and other activities is crucial. I think it's really the opportunity of the future. Have a great outdoors environment and have that drive our local economy. I hope that our kids and our grandkids can look back and realize that people that they never met made sacrifice and put time into something they believe very deeply in, which was a healthy river for future generations.
I like moving water. With that white noise in the background, it's kind of like a natural sound. When I'm standing in the moving water, it kind of just is like a therapy. It washes my troubles away. It quiets the internal dialogue of the worries about the bill or the schedules or whatever else. I was a blue-collar worker, but I was paid well, so I would save my money and go on these vacations. I went to Alaska a number of times. I fished in Maine, Colorado, trout fishing in New Zealand for 2 weeks, Mexico and the Yucatan. I did it then and didn't have much money left when I retired, and that's fine. Now it's the Stoney Creek, and that's really cool because it's right here.
A lot of what I do is just teaching kids like, hey, what is a watershed? Our wastewater is someone else's drinking water. So we need to think about that and keep our water as clean as we can. Like just dump the net in there so that way it knocks everything loose. We'll be fine. There's a little mayfly. Do you guys see the mayfly right there in the middle? He's right here. So stoneflies have two tails. That's a little stonefly that just hatched. I just want the kids to learn about it so maybe when they become adults and voters that they're going to think about it. They're going to think about the experiences they had here and why they should care about this stream.
Understanding one's watershed, it's like understanding one's zip code. People should not give up on Pennsylvania's waterways. They are among the most beautiful in the world, in my mind.
If we could do this here with the Conemaugh, a river that people said will never recover, we can probably do it anywhere. There's probably not a river or stream or lake or waterway anywhere in the country we couldn't restore and clean up if we can achieve this here.
I get a lot of calls, of course, every mayor does in every city now. And I try to do what I can do for the residents of Ehrenfeld. Everybody that lives here enjoys seeing that being going, and we'll see down the line what happens. We just hope and pray that someday it's a booming town again. Hope.
That'd be awesome. Thanks. And one of the things I want to stress is what a wonderful advocacy tool this film has turned out to be in the year since it's come out. And so we love showing it to audiences like you guys who know this is important and want to take some of these lessons home to your own waterways, but also just especially to the general public. And so some of the things we've been able to do with it since this film was completed, we turned it into a big advocacy tool. And so hours of pitch calling PBS stations around Appalachia to get them to screen this. And it's been shown in a bunch of different TV stations. We've gotten the Pennsylvania legislature involved and hosted a screening and tour of these sites in Johnstown and brought out the Environmental Resources Committee to see what this looks like on the ground and to meet the people that we see in the video and to get it into film festivals. And so Ben's been working to get this shown in film festivals, some of which have an environmental focus and some don't, to get this message in front of as many folks as possible. And so those are some of the ways we've been using this storytelling. And Ben, anything you want to add before we open it up to questions and reflections?
No, that's fine. I'm happy to just kind of respond to whatever people's curiosities are.
So yeah, having watched this, any questions or any thoughts looking at this, how this could be brought home to the places where you guys work?
So I'm Nancy Stoner from the Potomac River Keeper Network. So we have acid mine drainage in some of the upper reaches of the Potomac. There was a lot about what the remediation was, and by the way, great film. I should have started with that. Really good film, really enjoyed it. And it's very inspiring. So I can see why you're using it the way you're using it. I just wanted, it talked a lot about what you did and how it addressed the problem. I'm just wondering a little bit about what the mechanisms you use to get that to happen. I know that abandoned mines are point sources under the Clean Water Act, for example. Was that a tool you used? Did you use any kind of legal remedies or regulatory strategies in that?
And so I think there was already the will to do this cleanup. What there wasn't was some of the money. And so we were able to, and so the mines in question here, most hadn't been operational for, decades and decades before the Clean Water Act was in place. And so there were companies that had gone bankrupt. And so there weren't sort of the bad actor that usually is there to sue. So for example, the coal plant we could sue, they were still there, they were still polluting. They were the ones we were able to sue. And so they had to improve their own facilities. But then the problem that we see with abandoned mine land is that most of the time the bad actor has been gone for decades, if not, over a century. And so they're not there to pay the penalty. And so that's one of the reasons we wanted to use this sort of unrelated lawsuit money to start to fund some of those efforts.
I think BAMR also was a big source of funding, right? I know there's been federal funding that's been applied to this as well, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, so under the Surface Mining Reclamation Act, the SMRCA programs that were reauthorized recently, that has been one of the major sources of funding for abandoned mine lands in Pennsylvania, sort of writ broadly. It's never enough. But yeah, we have over, I think, 250,000 acres of abandoned mine land in Pennsylvania. We have, miles and miles and miles of streams that are both either too acidic or too polluted to support life. And so it also, this is sort of one project. We need projects like this all throughout the headwaters of the Ohio, all throughout the headwaters of the Susquehanna, up in the Northeast and the headwaters of the Delaware. We see pockets like this.
Unless I'm mistaken, Stephanie, you probably know more about this, but one of the things that John Dawes, who's in the film, said when we were in Johnstown recently, showing it to legislators, is that the infrastructure bill actually has a kind of a huge amount of money earmarked for abandoned mine reclamation, and that he was saying there's $3 billion just for Pennsylvania alone, which is enough to deal with something like 2/3 of the contaminated sites, which is a huge amount of money and a huge step in the right direction. So I think each state was allocated a certain amount of money based on the total amount of damaged land, toxic land that they have. So it seems to me that there's like a pretty good potential tailwind at the moment, but then the big question is sort of like, how are those funds expended? Are they, it's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and one of the key things that's different from a lot of the other pollution that we need to remediate is that it is often ongoing, that it's not, you don't, dig it up and put it somewhere else, that especially the pump system that you saw, that's something that's going to need to run in perpetuity. And so not only doing, sort of the one-time capital investment, but setting up the permanent fund to keep that going years after the folks who do the initial remediation are gone.
Yeah, hi, this is Kristen Saki-Blanc. I work under contract as a field liaison in support of National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's grants programs. And one of the things that I noticed, and this is just a project design question, I thought the storytelling was fabulous. I love the different voices from, indigenous people from the region to people who are newer transplants. But, often in restoration science, you kind of start at the headwaters and you reclaim that site, and then you go downstream, you reclaim that site. And I know that those 2 triangles of the 7 big ones were the furthest downstream on the river. I just wonder, how was it just, even though they were the big ones, how was it decided to start there and work upstream as opposed to the reverse? Do you have any ideas on that?
Those were, and Ben, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, those were simply the biggest sources. Like those were the ones bleeding the most of the acid mine drainage. And so it's, if you're doing triage, you start where the bleeding's the worst. And then they're sort of moving to the ones that are responsible for sort of less of the overall runoff.
Yeah, I think they tried to combine, like those sites were sites where they were also getting multiple streams. I mean, not literally maybe streams, but sources of contamination where they could combine that contamination in with one and deal with it with one treatment plant. And that's, so it's as you said, Stephanie, it's just that they were, they knowing that they can't treat every source of contamination, they were just trying to group them.
Yeah, there was a lot of different, I think, of the underground systems that converged in that, specifically at the St. Mary's point is where you could access a lot of the effluent of the various underground systems.
What's the time frame from when remediation begins to when, recreation can be prosperous, when fish come back? Like, what's the overall kind of time frame you would look at for a project like this?
I think if you're saying what would you look to, I think it's obviously like very site specific, which is like not a helpful answer, but it's sort of true nonetheless. I think that it's in stages. And so one of the things that I don't know if he mentioned it in the film, but I know that the guy who owns Coal Tubin, that he wanted to know sort of like when the river safe enough that we can put people out in boats. And that, which is a different threshold than like, is it safe to swim in? And that's a different threshold than is it safe to drink? And so it's sort of in gradations. What is remarkable is I think the time scale of the bounce back is pretty incredible, that when you look a decade ago and it looked like Campbell's soup, and now you're getting some invertebrate diversity and you're getting, you can see the difference in the river. And a lot of the the wonderful thing about, the macroinvertebrates that are the base of the ecosystem is that they have really quick life cycles. We're not trying to reestablish sea turtles. It only takes a couple seasons to some of them to repopulate really quickly. And so if you can sort of turn off the tap on on the acid mine drainage waste at the source, it does connect to other headwaters, like the one that the school kids were playing in. You do have some healthy headwaters that can help be sources to repopulate the rest of the waterways. But yeah, I think timeframes vary pretty wildly in the projects I've seen in Pennsylvania.
Hey, first of all, I want to say thank you. Such a beautiful film. And the Orange River images are stunningly disgusting, but just extremely helpful visually to understand the problem. We're dealing with potential future gold mining here in Virginia, as well as hundreds of old historic abandoned gold mines that have never been reclaimed. And so other than you all, I'm curious about who else in Pennsylvania is tackling this issue. If we in Virginia wanted to kind of identify other partners to learn from, who else might you recommend that we reach out and talk to?
So the the groups that I think of as the true experts on this in Pennsylvania are EPCAMR, Eastern Pennsylvania Coalition for Abandoned Mine Reclamation, which is a mouthful, EPCAMR, EPCAMR, and then WIPCAMR, which is the Western Pennsylvania version of them. And they may be members of at least EPCAMR might be members of the Choose Clean Water Coalition. And I'm happy to make an introduction to them for you guys. And then we work with for the lawsuit. So if you're considering sort of any potential sort of legal avenues, the National Environmental Law Center is the sort of in-house legal team that PennEnvironment works with on cases like this. And we do a lot of litigation like this. And we also partner with we're rarely the only group in a suit. So if you want to, meet them or talk to them, I'm happy to connect as well on that. Yeah, I mostly PennEnvironment. We're not really we like to help do storytelling and get it in front of people and then use those stories for advocacy. We are rarely the group like with the shovels in the ground doing the hands in the dirt physical reclamation. Is it just like post lunch as like folks are feeling the burritos or?
Hey all, I'm Nikki Gorpade with Ducks Unlimited. So it seemed like the location that all of this took place, there was a lot of public support from the local community. Obviously, historically, a lot of those mines have been closed, and with that, a lot of the job opportunities had probably vanished, and they probably, presumably, I don't know this for a fact, but they probably were happy with the prospect of having a potentially new industry, outdoor recreation, replace some of those jobs. And I think a lot of old legacy mining operation areas would probably have similar thoughts, but how would you overlay this type of model with Pennsylvania's other large issue, agriculture? Obviously those continue to go on. There's still quite a lot of money there and a lot of jobs. And I have to imagine that the local communities there would probably see things a little differently, but how would you sort of mix and match this type of work with the other big problem from the upper parts of the watershed?
Yeah, and especially in the context of the Chesapeake, places where we have a lot of agricultural runoff are like those are the more proximate sources versus these like really headwater abandoned mine places. I'm not sure. I think that, when you have the sort of the collapse of coal, which still, but I can't stress enough though, it still looms very largely culturally for people. So even though very few people still work in coal, its presence is still very deeply felt, and it's still very like a current topic. It's still very much in the present consciousness. And so I don't think it's quite as much in the past as one might think when you go to Johnstown, or you go to Pittsburgh, you go to, Williamsport. But I think, when I look at the agricultural communities, like we could do more recreation on the Conestoga in Lancaster. Like we could do more with, getting people out on the Susquehanna, which it happens to some extent, but we could, do even more of that. And so I think there's still, it's more like that's an industry we want to develop parallel to what we've parallel to the agriculture that's like still happening and still booming and still prosperous, versus sort of subbing out one for the other. Johnstown sort of like the fewer people are working in coal. We'd love them to work in outdoor recreation. I think that's more an opportunity where we could have them both, running in parallel successfully if we, put in the buffer zones and if we clean up our trout streams in central Pennsylvania. I think they can coexist.
I imagine renewable energy would be another area that could be complementary to agriculture as well, right? In terms of developing more renewables and solar farms, wind farms, and other kinds of whatever those ideas are that could work within the agricultural industry. But I'm not the expert on that, so.
Ben also makes movies about climate change and clean energy. They're great. Check them out.
I'm just a dilettante. But I would say though, I mean, and I can't see if, I don't mean to interrupt anybody if there was somebody going to ask a question, but you know, one of the things we talked, Stephanie and I talked about before this, which I think about a lot, is like how to pick subjects and make films, whether it be like a 2-minute film for a specific campaign or a feature film or something like this, which is somewhere in the middle, that you know, can provide a platform for conversation and dialogue, but also specifically for action and for movement. And you know, because I don't make films about these issues just to feel like I'm keeping myself busy. You know, the goal is to have some sort of a concrete impact come out of it. And so it's been really nice to see this film, which is a very modest film really in terms of budget and everything else, start to play actually a really useful convening role in partnership with Foundation for Pennsylvania Watersheds, the Allegheny Foundation, Allegheny Mountain Foundation, Foundation for Allegheny, something like that, and also with the Pennsylvania, the subcommittee on recreation and tourism that Stephanie mentioned. You know, there's a lot of these things that come from like loose social connections that people have, but the film gets in front of these different groups of people. And I mean, you can just see the excitement. I was there in Johnstown when they came to do the visit a few weeks back. And you had a real wide range of legislators, you know, across the political spectrum. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. And by the end of 2 days, and having spent a bunch of time with the people in the film, a lot of us really, like Chad Gonkovic from Cold Tubin and Mike Cook from the Ben's Creek Canoe Club, and Jackie Ripko, who's the conservation educator, and John Dawes, and everyone, like they were eating it up. I mean, you know, from all across the political spectrum, seeing that the potential for bringing back both the environment, but also the economic legacy that this town once had, that people took so much pride in. You know, Johnstown also is a big steel town. And you know, if you've ever been to Johnstown, it's got these like literally miles and miles. I think there's 13 square miles of abandoned steel mills, and that someone threw that number out there, which still boggles my mind. But there's a lot of eagerness to see a reemergence of these economies and jobs, not just in the recreational sector, but also, you know, reinvigorating and just, you know, pioneering in some of these areas. And so I'm always kind of looking for those stories that don't just offer hope, but also offer, you know, some sort of a shared, some way of finding places for people to come together, essentially. So I think that's a real important thing to look for.
All right, I know we're at time and folks have to get to their field trips, but thanks so much for joining us for this. And I'm happy to talk more after if folks want to. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks for coming.